I want you to imagine your favorite thing, your favorite archetype, your favorite card, your favorite commander, your favorite color combo. I just want you to imagine what your favorite thing is. And I want you to internalize how great those cards make you feel. I'm here to tell you that I have personally made my Magnum Opus my favorite deck of all time. It might not be the most powerful deck I own. It might not be the most expensive deck I own. It might not even be a deck that particularly interests you. But just like you have something that's your favorite, this is my favorite deck ever. My Magnum Opus. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of how my Ishai Tana deck came to be. So this isn't your average deck tech video. Yes, we will go over some of the cards in the deck. Yes, we'll go over the strategies, the mulligan, how to play the deck as effectively as possible, as well as how the deck wins. But I want this tech deck to be different. I want to take you on a journey of how I put the cards in that I did, how I came to the conclusion of this partner pairing, how I went through draft after draft after draft of this deck to eventually figure out what the final draft would be. As cards come out, I might optimize a bit more. As more commanders come out, I might even find a more fun deck that I enjoy playing that fits my style even more than this one does. But this deck is everything I've ever wanted in a commander deck. It has card advantage. It has Jeskai and Naya colors. It has tokens. It has a go wide focus while also being flexible enough to focus on both commanders. It's got plenty of removal and interaction, and it's got plenty of protection. All of these things are something that I want in a deck. It's probably my most flexible deck I've ever built, investing in both offensive and defensive spells. It has plenty of amazing ramp and tons of value pieces that allow the deck to function even better than it already does. And it has a land base that's optimized towards what the deck is wanting to do. So now that I'm done hyping up this deck, let's talk about the first draft of this deck. In my past two videos, I've talked about how much I have loved combat tricks. I find combat tricks extremely interesting, especially in the format of Commander. I think that they offer a huge variety of gameplay and decision making and skill expression within the game of Commander and Magic as a whole. This led me on a big search of what commanders can use these combat tricks to their fullest effect. As I go along, I can find many different commanders and many different color combos, but they never quite did it for me. Then I started to look at partner pairing, and I remember there are two commanders that are either really big or get affected by combat damage happening to players. At first, I thought of Tana and Timna. Timna allows for great card advantage, as well as making the tokens through Tana allows me to use aristocrat effects on those tokens that are made due to the black and white of Timna. At first, this was a great idea in theory, but as I tried to make the deck more and more, it just was not working out. Also, the lack of blue really made me not enjoy the deck as much. I've started to really like blue as I've grown more and more as a Magic player, and so I looked into a different option, and I wanted upon the option of Ishai. Now, Ishai adds the blue that I'm looking for, and Ishai on his own gets bigger and bigger without you really needing to do anything, and those are permanent counters. Pair Ishai up with Tana, and you have two incredibly high value targets that can attack for a ton of damage each. This allows flexibility in who you attack, who you use your combat trick with. It makes the opponents have to decide which is the bigger threat at which point, and allows the deck to win through either commander damage or through token payoff. Either way, Ishai just adds so much more to the deck than something like a Timna would. Timna could draw you a couple more cards, yes, but Ishai is definitely more of a threat, and having two threats on the board allows for more deck building process around your commanders being important. So I decided to go with Ishai and Tana. Now, I like to think of four colors as a 3-color combo shell and splashing a 4th color. That's really how I like to think about 4-color. This is just so that you can have a pretty good land base for that 3-color combo, and you can add in some dual lands and maybe 1 or 2 basics of that 4th color, so your land base can still be pretty optimal. With a combat tricks deck, I definitely wanted to go with more of a Naya shell with a little bit of blue on top of that. The blue definitely helps with some of the deck in terms of interaction and protection. Other than that, it's pretty much a Naya deck that's focused around Tana and tokens, with Ishai being more of a distraction. Ishai can certainly attack and certainly will put in work in certain games, but Tana is kind of the main focus of the deck. After I finished out what my shell would be and my 2 commanders that I would use, I decided to start adding cards. I added plenty of combat tricks, plenty of ramp, and plenty of valuable pieces that can go into the deck that could help the deck function. This made me pick out about 150 cards, ranging from all different price ranges, all different mana values, and all different scales of effectiveness as cards in my deck. From there, I started to whittle down the cards into one of 5 different categories. First, you have offense. Offense is going to be any card that's going to be pure offensive power for my commanders. The only little bit of defensive help that this might give you is it gives you a little bit of health in some of the buffs. But other than that, it's about making the commander's power or fighting abilities as good as they possibly can be. Cards like Teamer Battle Rage and Flaming Fist allow for both of my commanders to get a ton of buffs, making both of them even bigger threats. In the offensive side, I have more than just combat tricks. I have a card like Guide of Soul that allows me to put more +1/+1 counters that allow me to give permanent buffs to my creatures. And I have cards like Jetmir that can help me finish the game out fairly quickly with a pretty cheap card. I even have a Hardened Scales in there that will essentially double all the 1/1 counters that Ishai will get. All this to say, the offensive cards help my power be as high as possible at all times. Next, I sorted the defensive cards. Now, the defensive cards in most cases are also combat tricks. They also help my commanders get bigger and bigger, but they also add some sort of defensive side, whether that's a protection through indestructible or hexproof, or they allow me to get protection from things, or they allow combat to run smoother for me. Things like Noble Heritage is a huge boon in this deck. It gives me plenty of buffs to both of my commanders, as well as incentivizes my opponents to use those counters to hopefully stay away from my side of the board. I then have plenty of cards that give all indestructible or hexproof. Miri Weatherlight Duelist is also really great. Miri can attack with my 2 commanders and allows me to only get attacked by one thing each combat. It helps when I'm fully tapped out, or if I just have a couple 1/1 Saprolings, it can protect me from things like that. I then sorted out some interaction and removal. You don't need a ton of this, as most of the deck is going to try to go as fast as possible, but it's always good to have at least a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 of these interaction pieces in your hand at all times. We mostly have a Bant package here, pretty much all the greatest interaction and removal spells in blue, white, and green, as well as a specialty piece of Slash the Ranks that destroys everything except commanders. And when we have 2 commanders, whereas most people have 1, we get more value out of this card. I then sorted things by ramp. You don't need too much ramp in here, as the mana curve is pretty low. You have plenty of turn 1 options, turn 2 options, and turn 3 options. Before turn 4, you're going to be playing your commander. So there's not too much ramp, but it always helps for either land fixing or mana fixing. For mana dorks, we basically have the best 3 mana dorks that we could possibly get in these colors. And then we have some artifact ramp and 2 land ramp that can help us fix our mana better. Now, the last category I decided to add was value. All of these cards help our deck do something better in many different ways, whether that be doubling up our triggers, allowing us to capitalize more and more on our Saprolings entering the battlefield, giving us a bit of card advantage, or allowing us to pump up our creatures even more. These value pieces are just great cards in this color combo that is centered around a token-based strategy. So those are the 5 categories that I decided to put my cards into as I was building the deck. Then came the playtesting phase. As I was playtesting, I could easily present wins on turn 6, 7, and 8. Around those turns is when I either have a critical mass of tokens, I have an overrun effect through Jetmir, or my Ishai and Tana are big enough that commander damage starts becoming a threat. Typically then, because I have defense and interaction and removal as a big part of my deck, I usually have in my hand and some open mana a source of protection. When playing this deck in real life, it slows down just a little bit, as you might want to keep up that mana even more. So typically you can expect something around 7 or 8. This is not a CEDH deck. This is definitely just a high-powered commander deck that can tackle most challenges and most archetypes. So let's talk about the mulligans. In the mulligan phase, you're not necessarily looking for ramp, but it's always something that's helpful. What you're mostly looking for is a good land base that has plenty of variety of colors. If you can get 3 of your 4 colors, that's typically a good sign, as well as about 3 lands. Since we're running 36 lands, you have a pretty good chance of getting this in your opening hand. Then a ramp source could always be nice, maybe an enchantment that can help us out, maybe an enchantment or creature that can contribute to the strategy, and of course a combat buff, either offensive or defensive. That's kind of the ideal hand that we're looking for. If you have 2 or less lands, it's probably good to just ship the hand. Unless you have one of those 1-mana dorks and a green source to play it, 2 lands is just not a good idea. Of course, anything less than 2 lands is automatically a ship as well. And honestly, anything more than 4 lands is something you might want to reconsider also. You don't want to have 5 lands in hand, as typically you want those first 3 turns to be setting up with value cards that can help you further your game plan for when your commanders come out. You don't want to sit there doing nothing for 4 turns, play a Tana, and then get it Path or Swords to Plowshares. In most mulligans, you typically will find a pretty healthy balance of ramp, combat tricks, and lands. The deck's numbers and mana curve are low enough where you'll typically have at least 1 or 2 cards that you can play in the early game as you ramp out into your commander. And then after you play your commander, you'll typically have drawn into some protection pieces or some valuable cards that can help you get even further ahead. So now, how do we play the deck to its fullest effect? As I said in the beginning, this is definitely more of a Tana deck than it is an Ishai deck. In most cases, you're trying to get to Tana as fast as possible and attack with Tana with combat tricks as much as possible. There is an argument for playing Ishai pretty early as well, but you almost always play Ishai after you play Tana. And Ishai is there to just sit there and accrue value by getting a ton of 1/1 counters on it. Because Ishai is almost always going to be bigger than Tana, you don't necessarily need to put combat tricks on Ishai when he attacks, but it certainly can come in handy as the game goes along and you try to win through commander damage, especially if Tana keeps getting targeted. The point of the deck is to use these 2 high valuable targets to keep each opponent guessing as much as possible on which one is the bigger threat at which point in time. This is also great when it comes to bluffing, hiding your intentions as best as possible, waiting till the last minute to use those combat tricks that we love so much. This lets the deck have so many flexible game plans where you can win through commander damage, you can win through tokens, you can win through overrun effects, and winning through all these different ways allows you to always stay ahead of your opponents because you know what's going to be the most effective route to victory, whereas they will be guessing. So this has been the story of how I put this deck, Tana and Ishai, and how it's become probably my favorite deck I've ever built. In Commander, I love flexibility. I love having flexible game plans, and I love being able to hide my intentions just a little bit. Keeping my opponents guessing allows me to just add a little bit of mental stress into their game to hopefully force them to make bad decisions as they go along. Just like in fighting games, just like in poker, and just like in Magic, you want to force your opponent into decisions where they lose, or at least to make them think that they will. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I've been Deck Driver. I'll see you guys later.